Hey everybody, Michael LeJeune here with Game Changers for Government Contractors. And today we have a very special guest here. We have Kevin from Deltek on, and we're going to be talking about their clarity survey that they do every year. And I am excited to hear some insights from you on this, Kevin. But before we hop in and talk about the survey that you do, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your role over at Deltek.
Sure, yeah. I'm Kevin Plexico. I'm Senior Vice President of our information products here at Deltek. At Deltek, we really have two product lines. We have our software solutions and we have our information products, the main one being our GovWin market intelligence solution. So we have about 6,000 government contractors that use GovWin to access upcoming opportunities, help them build pipeline, and really support their business development processes with market intelligence. So I manage the research team and product team for GovWin, which is about 200 people strong. Largest team of analysts supporting companies in the federal, state, local, and Canadian market. So that's what my team does. And I've grown up as a research analyst pretty much. I started my career with the company that Deltek acquired that became GovWin, and so have been one of those rare birds that's sort of been in the same career path for my entire career, about 30 years.
Nice, nice. Well, one of the things that I always say about this market is if you want to excel in it, you really need to understand how to be a researcher. Like there's so much research that needs to happen in this game in order to really excel at it. Really in any kind of business, but when you have so much data available like you do in this market, if you can be a really good researcher, you can take your game to the next level. So I appreciate what you do on the research side of things very, very much. It's very near and dear to my heart. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about this clarity survey that you guys do. So why does Deltek conduct it annually? Let's start with that.
Sure. So we feel like Deltek is in a really unique spot in our market with being a leading provider of software and information products to the government contracting community. As I mentioned, we have thousands of customers that do business with government agencies, and this market is, as you know, very different, very unique. It has its own sort of defined rules and regulations of how agencies buy, and so there's very much a culture and a unique dynamic about what makes companies successful in this market that I think is very different than what you'd find in other markets. So we have a lot of our customers that are thirsty for information about the market. What are they seeing, and how does that compare to what other companies are seeing? And are they seeing similar things? Are they seeing different things? And I think more to the point, they really want to know what are the benchmarks for various measures, like our financial performance, our business development performance, our project management practices. How should we be operating ours? And when we run into challenges, what can we learn from other companies and how they're dealing with it so that we can be more successful? And so we just feel like that's a great solution and kind of capability with our market intelligence and research capabilities that we can provide to our customers.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, again, it's anytime you can get an edge some way, somewhere, it's really, really powerful in this market. So what do the clarity findings tell you about the GovCon market conditions like right now?
Yeah, so I think right now companies are conservatively optimistic, I would say, is probably the best way to characterize it. They're generally expecting growth in the year ahead, so they're optimistic about their business prospects. When we asked them to report how they did the prior year, 54% said their growth was better versus prior year. That's compared to 49% the year before. So generally, companies expect to be growing and have experienced growth on the majority. But as you know, there's this lingering level of uncertainty in this space, in particular this year around the elections. But we always don't know what funding is going to be, even though the funding period for the fiscal year starts October 1st. We're in a continuing resolution right now, and that's pretty much the norm these days. So I think what we see is companies are following the agency's lead, where there's uncertainty about what the timing of funding is, but optimistic that the funding is going to be there when they get around to appropriating it.
Yeah, I always, and I'm glad you brought this up, because I always say election year is my least favorite time of the 4-year cycle that we have with government contracting, because you see so many people just kind of freeze up and wait, and they're watching for the election. And then even after the election, it really doesn't matter who wins. After the election, they're waiting on that first 100 days. and things like that. And so you see the markets, both commercial and government, but in this space where they kind of freeze up a little bit and they're kind of watching, they're indecisive about what to do next. And it's a very interesting time. Do you see anything that stands out to you about this particular election cycle that is any different, where there's more or less hesitation in the market, or anything going on? And by the way, for the folks that may be listening post this, we're recording this just before the 2024 election. And so,
Right.
so yeah, but it's every 4 years we see this. And then every 2 years, even as Congress is going through, there's a little bit of a pause, but I really find it's the presidential election that causes the most anxiety, if you will, for most people. So,
Yeah, and I think we're in a really unique election cycle compared to previous election cycles that we've had recently, where we didn't know the candidate for the Democratic Party was going to be the candidate until just like a month or so ago. So relatively recent, identification of a candidate with a candidate switching. Now that's certainly unprecedented, never happened. So people are learning about a new candidate that they weren't considering at the time when they've been going through the year. And I think the other thing that's really unique about this election is, not only is the presidential election important to watch, but the control over the Senate and the House is very much
mm-hmm.
a toss-up as well. I think most sort of political prognosticators are expecting the Senate to switch to the Republican Party, and the House is, the razor-thin margin the Republican Party has, I think, has a lot of uncertainty around which way that's going to go as well. And at the end of the day, that has a lot of influence over what kind of momentum or inertia that the new administration is able to get, depending on how much support they're getting from Congress. So I think there's a lot of focus on that, and that this is a bit more of a unique period, given that unusual sort of combination of unknowns.
Yeah, it's the unknowns that usually cause a lot of anxiety and frustration with folks. And people always look at, not to go down the political road too far here, but just to give some additional insight. I think people, in one way, put too much emphasis on the political side of it, because I always look and say it really doesn't matter what program, unless there's a handful, right? For the most part, if you're a government contractor, you're going to be a government contractor after this election. It's just a matter, what are the pet projects that the new president's going to pick, his administration, her administration? What are they going to pick that are going to be the pet projects that they put some funding in, and they have to shift a little funding somewhere or another? But when you look at the DoD and you look at FEMA and you look at all these agencies, they're going to keep doing what they're doing. There's really slight differences. And so I think people put too much focus on that. And that's something I'd love to see people kind of back away from a little bit and just say, hey, look, we're going to be a government contractor. We're all in, we're doing this. It really doesn't matter who's in the White House. It really doesn't matter who's in Congress. The money's going to keep flowing. It's just a matter of, where do the dollars shift? Like the river kind of flows all the time, but is it going to shift a little to the left, a little to the right? Is it going to stay where it is? We don't know, but the money's going to keep flowing. And that's the thing people need to look at. When it comes to the small business contractors, I noticed something about the survey. It said something like only around 38% of small business contractors are confident in higher revenues at the moment. So, like, what are the main challenges that they face competing with the large contractors, and maybe what are some of the advice that you have as we're going into this? Because it sounds like less than half, significantly less than half of small business contractors are confident at the moment. So,
Yeah, so I think if you think about large businesses versus small businesses, obviously on the small business side, there's a lot more of them, right? So as a result, there's a lot more competition in terms of volume of contractors. If you look at a typical small business opportunity, the number of potential bidders is way higher than on a large contract, where it's probably more of a smaller group of companies that are going to likely qualify for that. And you see that also in the trend with respect to sort of agencies' adoption of IDIQ contracts and leveraging these government-wide acquisition contracts, where there's at the end of the day, there's a finite number of positions on those vehicles, and
mm-hmm.
there's way more small businesses competing for them than there are large businesses in the large business pool. And the large businesses have the advantage of having presumably a successful track record and deep past performance that they can draw on to compete. Whereas, many small businesses I know are still trying to build that past performance capability so that when they do put their bid out into an opportunity, they can be competitive relative to the other companies they're competing against. I think the other thing, in addition to sort of that trend with IDIQs, which is essentially reducing the number of unique prime positions in the market, we're also seeing the compliance requirements growing for companies, and that's having an outsized impact on small business contractors. We saw just last week the release of the final rule for CMMC. So companies that are doing business in the Department of Defense are going to start to have to take on some pretty costly compliance requirements as it relates to cybersecurity. And that's going to have an outsized impact on small businesses that don't have sort of the size and scale to absorb some of those costs. And another example would be around business systems. A lot of these IDIQ contracts will have in their evaluation criteria, hey, we're going to give credit if you have an earned value management system, or if you have an approved accounting system from BCAA, or if you have some of these other business systems. So they're basically saying we not only care that you can do good work in the work that you're bidding on, we also care that you can do that good work the way that government is going to want you to do it in terms of the compliance requirements and certifications they want you to have. And that really does put I think a burden on small businesses. But I would say that also really paints the opportunity, I think, for small businesses that are serious about the market is don't be afraid to make your investments in your compliance capabilities, because it's one of the ways that you can differentiate yourself from those companies that maybe aren't as serious about the market, or think of compliance as more as a sort of begrudging task versus a way to competitively differentiate yourself from another company on a prime opportunity.
Yeah, I think for a lot of folks, they are just concerned that, well, it's going to make the market smaller. Like, yeah, that means there's less competition. However, the competition that's going to stick in are going to be serious. If they're going to go through all this process, I mean, people are, for the most part, are not going to go through all those hoops and not be serious about this. Doesn't mean that you can't beat them. It just means that they're going to be a little bit more serious. But to your point, when you look at some of these large prime opportunities, it may be 3 or 5 big primes competing, whereas a smaller, small business type of opportunity, it may be 35 or 40 or whatever it may
Or
be.
hundreds,
So or hundreds, hundreds, depending on what it is. So, it's not necessarily a bad thing when you're competing against less people, especially when you're competing against people that are a little more sophisticated. In my opinion, those people are going to have higher pricing than people that are less sophisticated, that just come in and say, well, we're just going to win this no matter what, and we're going to cut all the margin. And you can't compete with a company that has no floor on their pricing. It's really hard to compete with that. And so I think maybe eliminating some of the contractors that are either not too serious about the market or unsophisticated is a good thing for the market as a whole, because it's going to help maintain pricing and ultimately profit for a lot of people. But I think a lot of people don't think about that. So I thought I would point that out here. So, yeah.
Let me just point out one thing on that, because I do think it's an interesting point you make there. When you talk about market opportunity, I mean, the market is growing, but to your point, the number of companies competing in the market is fewer. And so the companies that are sort of left competing for these prime opportunities do have to be more sophisticated and more rigor. And on the plus side, that eliminates for the agencies some of the chafe and the companies that maybe aren't going to really be serious about the work. But it does pose some barriers to entry for companies that are new to the market that maybe are just trying to get started. So I think that's the one sort of dynamic that agencies are going to have to wrestle with, which is how much do we want to embrace new entrants that might have unique capabilities, but don't have the wherewithal or the appetite currently to comply with the unique requirements.
Yeah. Is there anything in this particular round that you found to be interesting that we haven't talked about, like something that just jumped out at you as, wow, people need to understand this about the survey?
Well, I would say this about the market. We've talked about this small business contracting trend with past performance being a challenge, and the Small Business Administration does a lot of things with their regulations to try to facilitate small business and make it easier. One of the things that was sort of created out of the SBA's policies is this notion of mentor-protégé joint ventures, where you have a small business that's able to leverage the past performance of a large prime when they can form these mentor relationships. And they've been on an opportunity and now all of a sudden look a lot more competitive because that small business is getting the benefit of that past performance, which is generally their weakness. The thing that's been sort of created out of that is a lot of these major IDIQs now are being won almost entirely for the small business proportions by these mentor protege joint ventures. So if you're a small business who wants to go it alone, you're almost at a major disadvantage to even be able to compete with somebody who's going to be married up to a large prime. So I think that's a three-headed monster the SBA didn't intend to create, and they're now trying to figure out some policy changes that can unwind that a little bit, that still allow those joint venture relationships to happen, but not be sort of a requirement for you to win an IDIQ position on a contract.
Right. Right. That's a really good point there. And I think for a lot of people new to the market, there's so much to learn about it that when they start running up against this stuff, they're like, well, how is this company competing with us? And how are they beating us with this? And then they're like, oh, there's this program and they don't understand the program. And then they start to rush to look for a mentor. And so I think people that are new to the market listening to this thinking, oh, Kevin just said I need to go get into a mentor protege. My advice is to take it slow and find the right mentor and make sure you've maybe teamed with them once or twice to make sure they're the right folks for you, but also to understand there's more than one mentor protege program. That's the thing that I run up against too, is a lot of people don't realize there's the SBAs, there's the DODs, DOE has one. I believe FAA may have one. These programs are popping up all over, and there's multiple ones you can take a look at depending on your agency. So don't just jump into one thinking that's what I need. Take a look and do a little bit of research, because to your point there, I do believe it's going to be a major factor as we move forward. So if you were to look ahead to 2025, what are, and beyond here, because I don't know if somebody's going to listen to this in 26 or 27, what are some trends or opportunities that you anticipate will have some of the biggest impact in this space?
So I think there's a couple areas that I think, regardless of what political party, sort of wins the presidency and what goes on with control over Congress, I think there's a few areas that are pretty easy to see right now are going to be from, just putting my government contractor hat purely on here, not my sort of role as a citizen hat here, but if I just put my government contractor hat on, national security, homeland security, these are topics that are going to be hot topics for either political party and areas where we're going to spend. I mean, our national security threats are only growing. I think defense spending is going to be ripe for continued increase and steady increases. So it's going to be sort of a safe bet, if you will, regardless of which political party you would prefer to be in the office. And I think that represents like something like 55 to 60% of government contract spending. So that's a safe area. I think both parties tend to be very focused right now on immigration and citizenship and border control. So I think that's going to be an area that's going to continue. Department of Veterans Affairs, veterans issues are always enjoyed bipartisan support, and that agency has probably enjoyed the strongest growth over the past decade to 2 decades that any agency has had. And where I think there's going to be the big question mark is around sort of social policy and tax policy. That's where there's the most political discourse. So if you're doing business in agencies like the Department of Education or Housing and Urban Development or possibly HHS, those are the ones where, depending on which way the political winds flow, you're going to have to pay a bit more attention. I would throw in there also the EPA and sort of climate initiatives. Those are the ones where, depending on which party wins the sort of the control over the government, you're going to want to pay attention to what's their inertia. But with all of these things, I think when there's an administration change and change in congressional leadership, it does provide an opportunity. I mean, there's uncertainty for sure, but there's also an opportunity that these administrations are going to come out with their new policies and their new initiatives, and all the agencies that are under them are going to be rolling out their platforms on how they're going to support those initiatives. And I think that's where to the extent that a company can align their capabilities to how they can support agencies with those missions, it's going to be an opportunity for them to be successful in this market. And that's something that has been true since the day I walked in this market 30 years ago and long before that.
Yeah. Yeah. Good insight there. Without getting into specific parties, and agendas and things like that. Do you have some advice for folks that are not just this election cycle, but next election cycle? For, let's say, the election is over and we have a winner. How does the average government contractor decipher where that winner is going to spend their money before it happens? Because, elections happen in November. We've got January inauguration. We've got the first 100 days. So do you have some advice for someone to say, okay, now that we have a winner, here's how I can look at, like the agencies you were just saying, whether it's the EPA or border or somewhere else, how can we look at where the money might flow given who this winner is and what their priorities? Would you recommend they look at the candidate's website? Where would you go if it was you to help determine, well, we may have to shift our strategy because we've been in the EPA for a while, or we haven't, and maybe we should consider it, or whatever it
Yeah.
may be. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so definitely with, I think, a different lens when you're going to their, obviously when you go to the campaign websites, you're getting a very, sort of politically tailored message, and you
Mm-hmm.
need to, again, put your government contracting hat on and sort of try to sift out the political elements, but read what the tea leaves would tell you in terms of what that means for the agencies that would play a role in those areas of focus. And those are going to be safe ways for you to start to plot, where might I expect to see some growth in spending? Where might I see some shifts and cuts in spending? Like we saw under the previous Trump administration, there was kind of a continued effort to try to reduce some civilian agency spending in order to fund defense spending. And I think that'll be a pattern what we'll see when you look at their policy priorities on their websites. Also, obviously what they put out in interviews in the press are good fodder as well. So just be careful of your news sources, obviously. But then past the elections, you're going to start to see things like when they actually come into office, executive orders that are going to start to tell you some things, OMB memorandum. They start to message the administration, selections that they make, and so it starts to form a picture that starts very fuzzy, but that becomes more and more clear over time exactly how these things are going to translate into contracting. The one thing I would just caveat there is, as you think about the federal budget cycle, like the budget for 2025, like that's been baked for probably since last February for the most part. The only thing that
Yeah.
wasn't decided was the total level of spending, but the rough spending priorities were baked under the current administration. And the new administration, if you think about the timing, we have basically somebody takes office in January, but we're already 4 months into the fiscal year. So for 2025, I wouldn't expect to see much change that you need to really react to in terms of like bets on opportunities and things of that nature. The 2026 budget is really the first budget that a new administration is going to have to put their footprint on the budget and the priorities and that's, it gives you a little bit of time, I would say.
Yeah. No, that's really good insight, because I do think people panic too much initially. They don't realize the budget cycle and how it works. They think, oh, this person's coming in office in January and they're going to make all these sweeping changes. And we did see some of that in the Biden administration initially, like the border wall was one of those where, we had clients who had contracts on the border wall and all of a sudden it was gone. No, those contracts were just gone overnight. That to me was something rare in the market. I haven't seen a lot of that in my 20 plus years in this market, where there were awarded contracts that people were working on that got yanked the way that happened. But I think people believe that every time it changes hands, which, believe it or not, regardless who wins, it's changing hands this time, because it's going to be a different person in that office. The impact is a little slower for the overall budget versus, like you said, the executive order. So I think those are all really good things for people to watch. And just like you said, start reading the tea leaves as early as you can, and you'll have some good predictors, not just for this election, for every election. And that's the thing people need to be watching for. So how do you see AI and other initiatives similar to that helping government contractors, hurting some challenges, any of that type of thing over the next year or two? Because AI has it's such a monster at the moment where people can't put their finger on. So I'm curious your thoughts on AI and how it may impact the market over the next year or so.
Yeah, I mean, I think in business development functions and areas where somebody's working on proposals and maybe submitting RFIs in response to agencies to try to put their message and their capabilities into agencies' hands and start to generate awareness for them. To me, it's a great playing field leveler for smaller companies to be able to produce more high quality proposals and responses to RFIs and more volume in a way that is meaningful. And I don't want to sit here and tell anyone or pretend to anyone that AI is going to write your proposal and you're not going to have to do anything and there's like a magic button you can hit. But if you've never written a proposal before and you ask it for help writing a proposal or a capture plan, it's going to give you some really good training and insight on how to go about doing that and make you think of some things that you probably wouldn't have thought of if
Right.
you were just working on it on your own. So I think it can make somebody who's new to the market or maybe not as experienced in things like writing proposals and doing government contract work to provoke thought in them around how they can do better and also help them with that first draft. It's not going to write the final volume for you, but it can
Right.
get you started with a first draft. And then obviously you need to weave in your unique capabilities, skill sets, experience, people, whatever it is that's going to be the thing that's going to make a difference for you. But all of that, I think, is going to result in the government getting better proposals. And I think also enable smaller businesses to be responsive to more proposals that or opportunities that are a good fit for them that they otherwise might not have time to. I mean, it used to be that when a
Yeah.
proposal came out, it was sort of all consuming for 2 or 3 weeks, and you basically had no time to do much of anything else if you're in a small business. And I think AI can really be a tool to maybe help you work on multiple things at the same time and be more productive in providing meaningful responses to those types of opportunities.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And I really think the contractors who focus on teaching everyone on their team how to use AI for all job functions are going to be the contractors that really excel in the market. There are too many that I talk to where only one or two people are using it in the office. They're still scared of it. They don't realize the advantage you can have, even if you're not on the sales team, if you're in customer service team, if you're in a product development team, if you are in HR. There's so many things you can be using AI for these days to make you better at what you do, to make it faster. That there's really not a lot of excuses not to use it, other than there's this notion that, well, maybe I'm going to put something in here. Now somebody's going to learn something about my business. People already know everything about your business. There's nothing new under the sun at all. You don't have, I always tell people, there's nothing that you have thought of that somebody else has not already implemented 100 times for the most part. It's extremely rare, right? And people think every idea they have in their business is the latest iPhone, and it's like it's not. It's just not. That's not the case.
Right.
So don't be afraid of it. You need to embrace it and figure out how to use it. I know there's some concerns over CMMC with using AI and things like that. We'll get all that squared away, but I think the people that embrace it are going to do exactly what you said. They're going to excel and they're going to be more competitive. And it's going to, like you were saying earlier, with the smaller amount of contractors, you're going to have to get better in order to compete. And so you need all the tools you can get. And this is a low cost, if not free tool that most people can use. Are there any specific, whether it's provisions, policies, rule changes, or things like that, that you think are going to help shape the market and maybe make some changes for large and small companies over the next year or two?
Oh, geez. I mean, there's so many things coming out. I would just identify maybe several themes to look after. Obviously, cybersecurity is one. If you're a SaaS provider, FedRAMP is getting much more adoption in agencies, and they're demanding it versus asking for it. CMMC, I think, on the defense side is something that defense contractors really have to pay attention to, and
Mhm.
we're already seeing signs that other civilian agencies might start to adopt some of the same practices that CMMC implements as a way of shoring up the contractor security on their own bids. So that's a theme. Supply chain is another one. They're forming an entirely new FAR part that's devoted specifically to supply chain security regulations. So that's one I would pay attention to. And then I think this is another one from the political realm, but I think both parties are going to be very focused on We want the work to be done in the U.S. We want the products to
Yep.
come from the U.S. to the maximum extent possible. So that's sort of in the theme of supply chain, not only sort of your security of your supply chain, but trying to maximize your U.S. participation in that. If you're, somebody who's buying products
Yeah.
from someone to provide to a government contractor or a government agency, that's something you're going to want to pay attention to as well. So those are to
Mm.
me the three themes. And then, every year the National Defense Authorization legislation seems to have woven into it some acquisition reforms and rule changes that take 3 or 4 years for the SBA and the FAR Council to implement. But I would go to the SBA's website. I would pay attention to the NDAA legislation. Great opportunity to use AI when the NDAA legislation comes out. Ask AI, hey, what new FAR changes are there in the legislation that I might need to be paying attention to, rather than reading the 1,000-page bill would be really helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for somebody who reads that every time it comes out, myself, uh, the biggest dork moment of my year every time, it's nice to have AI to now go read it for you and point out things. It's still interesting to read through some of that stuff, but to go and grab anytime there's a reference to small business or anything, or just ask it, hey, what are some significant changes that are coming? And it's interesting to see how AI, you can just upload that attachment and it'll read it and spit out some really cool things for you. So it's one of the reasons I advocate for having the paid version of ChatGPT or whatever it is that you're using, so you can add those attachments and have it read through those kind of things. So I really have one question. It's kind of two-sided here that I want to kind of end the show on today. And that is, are there any red flags or concerns that you saw that we've not talked about today that came out of the study? And then on the flip side of that, are there some things that show you some great optimism? So let's start with the red flags, and then let's end on the positive side with some optimism that you see.
Yeah, I think the red flags are the small business sort of issue of fewer contracts, fewer prime position for small businesses, and small businesses either getting squeezed out or possibly not able to enter the market because it's too darn expensive or too complicated. So, when we talk about, acquisition reform, it used to be, hey, we want to try to streamline and simplify acquisition regulations to make it easier. And when I hear acquisition reform now, for the most part, I hear things that are, making it more expensive, more compliance requirements, more things for somebody to do. Maybe they're defining it simpler, but they still entail more work. And so that would be I think the one red flag is for small businesses, just the cautionary note that this market is, not for the faint of heart, not for the casual entrant who
Mm,
thinks they can, bid on an opportunity, win it, and like off to the races they
yeah.
go. Your first government contract that you win is probably going to be the most expensive contract you ever win,
Yeah. Yeah.
because of all the infrastructure in terms of compliance that you have to put in place to be successful, both in probably winning the contract, and if not, the things that come with all the clauses and compliance requirements that are associated with it. So that's the red flag. The other part of your question, I'm sorry, was around
Yeah.
bright spot areas.
Yeah,
Is that
well, yeah, we'll talk the optimism here in a second, because I really
okay?
want to. I thank you for mentioning that people need to understand this is not a casual market that you have what I would call a casual relationship with. It's you've got to be serious about this market, and that is, to me, the biggest red flag I've seen on YouTube and other social media platforms over the last year and a half, 2 years, is a major push for people to look at this as a side hustle, as something easy to get into. It doesn't take a lot of effort. You can do this at home in your underwear type of thing. And I've seen such a push for that on social media, and it drives me freaking crazy. And so I love what you said there about, you need to be really serious about this market because of what it is, and how it's being squeezed is going to make that more important. The flip side of that question was, what did you see through the survey that creates optimism for the future?
Well, I mean, first of all, the optimism around the spending, which I think is well grounded. We don't have an environment where there's an expectation that government contract spending is going to decline. And if you look over history and compare it to other markets like the architecture, engineering, construction market, or the hospitality industry, you're going to find a market that's remarkably stable,
Mm-hmm.
remarkably predictable relative to other other industries. And, once you do make the investment to win that contract and you win those contracts, like if you start winning one, that next one becomes so much easier to win. Because the
Yeah.
government now sees that you've demonstrated you can win contracts. They like company. They like to know somebody else has done business with you and that you've been successful in doing that. So when they're going into their dark rooms and looking at the bids they've received, and they look at the past performance, they're focusing on where's a company done this kind of work before, and hey, do I know somebody in that agency? Maybe I can make a call. Like that network still happens.
Yeah.
So don't think it's this pure, hey, we're just going to look at what's on the paper and go from there. I mean, they have networks, they have relationships, and this is still very much a people business. And so, just like any industry you sell into, you want to have a relationship with the customer. You don't want the first time they see you to be the time you submit your proposal. And it's going to be really hard if you haven't had some experience in government agencies, either as a prime or a subcontractor, that you can show them that you can live up to the requirements of doing business in a federal agency, not just doing your work, but also complying them and keeping them out of trouble with all the regulations that they have to live up to do their work effectively.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. It really is an optimistic time to be in the market. I always tell people the better time, or they always ask me, what's the best time to get in the market? I always say yesterday. Yesterday was the best, and second best is today. So if you couldn't got in yesterday, then get in today, because the market is always going to be here. It's always doing great things. There's always an opportunity. It's just a lot of it revolves around relationships and education. And if you can get those two things knocked out, then you move into the research phase, and that's where I see companies really thrive. Those ones that can find the information they need, whether it's a phone number, an email address, a person's name, a contract vehicle. There's something you need to find usually, and once you find that little nugget, that's what helps you have that edge. So, thank you for coming on and talking about all this. I think the survey is a really great thing. I think we'll have a link to it in the description notes for the podcast. But thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this, Kevin.
Mike, thanks so much. Great to be with you. Appreciate the time.